To mark the 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence on 25th November 2021, the United Nations Development Programme, UN Women and partners joined efforts in the first multi-country live-stream e-event on Facebook to mobilize the UN system, government partners, civil societies and women's rights organizations to advocate for a world free of violence against women and girls.
16 Days came about as a civil society campaign. Civil society has been at the forefront of the 16 Days of Activism. And so UN Women's role is really to support civil society as well as government partners in making sure that their national actions are supported.
The UN Secretary General's Unite by 2030 to End Violence Against Women campaign is marking the 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence for 2021 under the global theme, Orange the World, End Violence Against Women Now.
UNDP has been supporting GBV prevention and response work through the Spotlight Initiative in Vanuatu and Fiji. The Spotlight Initiative has supported the work around survivors' access to services, development training materials and guidelines on GBV, community awareness creation on GBV, trained women on GBV and reproductive health rights, capacity building and training of key stakeholders, plans to renovate public prosecutor's office, training to MPs in gender-sensitive budgeting in the Solomon Islands and Fiji.
Under the theme, End Violence Against Women Now, respond, innovate, and leave no one behind to orange the world, the UNDP Pacific Office joins the Unite campaign, which is the United Nations Secretary General's campaign by 2030 to end violence against women, to call upon activists, governments, and UN partners to mobilize people and highlight issues relevant to preventing and ending violence against women and girls, not only once a year, but every month, every day, in every hour.
There are cases of intimate partner physical or sexual abuse, violence, exploitation, trafficking, could be economic and mental violence, and many other forms of violence against women. It is noted that prevalence of gender-based violence in this region is particularly high, and it is much higher than the global average, which is 35%. In Solomon Islands, where I'm based, this figure is quite high, and it's one of the highest in the Pacific region, with 64% of women reporting to have experienced some forms of violence between the ages of 15 to 49.
We have to state outrightly, violence against women and girls is an absolutely grave violation of human rights, and it is deeply rooted in gender inequality and gender-based discrimination. The 16 Days of Activism is the time that we galvanize our actions towards the elimination of violence against women and girls.
In Fiji, the statistics for gender-based violence is very high. The most prevalent cases were against women and children.
A total of 14,108 crimes against women were recorded from 2016 to 2020. The prevalent offenses being assault occasioning actual bodily harm and criminal intimidation, likewise common assault. Assault causing actual bodily harm recorded 1,899 cases, criminal intimidation 1,330, and common assault 1,317 cases that has been recorded with the Fiji Police Force.
The Fiji Police Force Community Policing is working closely with communities to ensure that cases are recorded and dealt with.
You are at the receiving end of the gender-based violent cases, and you want to be able to reverse that cycle and be at the forefront on the preventative side rather than the reactive side. And that is why, as I mentioned earlier, that we are targeting the family institutions. We cannot do it alone, and we need your support. And hopefully we will not have to wait for specific times in the year to get together, but rather asks you all to come through the open door that has been made accessible to all, to discuss and deal with issues and complaints when it is brought to our attention. The quicker the better, as we do not want victims to be further victimized through our failures to play our roles effectively.
Let me begin by saying that the Fijian government is committed to the safety and well-being of our citizens. Through our constitution, to our commitments to international conventions, we remain dedicated to addressing and eliminating the scourge of gender-based violence. The ministry has been working smartly to continue implementing the national gender policy. This is with specified activities and key areas which shape the government response to working with our key stakeholders for gender equality, including the work to eliminate gender-based violence.
In April 2020, the United Nations Secretary-General urged all governments to make the prevention and redress of violence against women and girls a key part of their national response plans for the COVID-19 pandemic. In Fiji, the lockdown period during COVID-19 adversely affected market vendors, especially women, who were the most vulnerable.
Women vendors put their lives in health at risk because of traveling late at night from villages to the market. And when they reach the market, it's late at night. They usually sleep with their belongings, their sacks of produce along the bus stands. And when they go home, they are expected to take that much money home from what they sold from the produce. And if they're not, they get sexually abused by their own husbands. Sexual harassment during traveling, within the traveling places from their villages to the market. So this is some of the things that they encounter.
Despite COVID-19, the Markets for Change project continued to support women market vendors, not only in empowering them economically, but giving them the confidence to speak out and defend their rights.
So Market for Change project was to ensure, the aim was to ensure that the markets in Fiji are safe and inclusive, and women are socially and economically empowered. And I, for one, is a testament of that.
At another level, online activity during COVID-19 was very high.
During the pandemic, survivors of GBV were searching for information, services, and support on what to do when experiencing violence, how to get help, and how to prevent violence online. This has exposed them to potential risk of harassment in digital space. At the same time, online support for survivors increased through groups on Facebook to shed light on domestic violence and issues women face, as well as Instagram posts and campaigns to raise awareness on violence against women and funds and resources for women's shelters.
In Tonga, the Family Protection Legal Aid Clinic used innovative solutions to assist and help survivors of gender-based violence to access services through digital development and involvement of civil society.
The online platform, the idea is, as it was mentioned earlier by our opening speaker, the first is to provide information to survivors of domestic violence and gender-based violence in remote locations. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's been Tonga is this 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main islands, and there's been a very, there has been a significantly low number of people from the outer islands accessing justice and utilizing the center since it was established. So we worked on this, and the idea is to enable those in remote locations and islands to access information about the family laws, and particularly the Family Protection Act 2013, that will not only just empower them just to get the information, really, first of all, and when they're confident to report it, then they can also use the same online platform to report violence.
The COVID-19 crisis has led many to spend more time online. And although digital violence is an area that can do with more data and statistics, We have sufficient information to know that women and girls are more likely to experience cyber harassment, online sexual violence, and online misogyny. The existing gender gap in access to ICT and online resources means women are less experienced with ICT, making them more vulnerable in digital space.
Violence takes many forms, and we are very passionate about children, young girls who are sexually assaulted, the incest problem, and rape, and all that. We know for a fact that many who suffer from this type of violence, they can't share about it. So if this online platform can empower them to share that information and report it, it serves its purpose.
In Fiji, there was a recorded 606% increase in calls to the National Domestic Violence Helpline between February to April 2020, the period during which initial COVID-19 lockdowns occurred.
The Ministry for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, as the lead agency in developing the National Action Plan to prevent violence against women and girls, has commenced a consultation of an evidence-based, whole-of-government and whole-of-population approach, measurable and inclusive 5-year plan with an emphasis on stopping violence before it starts.
The Spotlight Initiative in Vanuatu were also busy raising awareness.
So under the Spotlight Initiative, SISTA and HCDI have been using a Pacific-based story-on method to raise gender-based violence awareness and promote change. We started this by firstly conducting interviews with various stakeholders, including survivors, health and justice officers, community helpers, and reformed offenders. We wanted to understand, what does the journey to end violence against women and girls really, really look like? We've been talking about it for years. This is the same conversation we had last year and the year before. It's the same conversation. So, we tell women to speak out. We tell people to intervene. We encourage women to go to their chief, to their pastor, or to access services that deal with gender-based violence. But seriously, what does this look like? It's so easy to advise this, but the how-to is another question.
Using theatre as a means of disseminating information, the Solomon Islands Dreamcast Theatre proved it was an effective way in raising awareness on gender-based violence.
The Theatre for Development model, and why it is innovative. So, you gather a bunch of artists together and you sit them in a room. And then you ask them to tell their own stories, their experiences. So put gender into the topic. You have young people conversing on their experiences, also noting that, there are certain limits to what you share and what you depending on the pace and relevance of when you want to share these stories. But, some of the stories are very tough for young people. We've had some very powerful stories that came out that, we have to ask young people if they're willing to share that story.
So we believe that for women and girls to be empowered and have equal standing in society, we need to address these knowledge gaps, shift attitudes, encourage new behaviors, and evolve social norms. We try to do this in a way that is accessible for the everyday person. And this is why we use Facebook and arts. So like the fashion show, yes, we get these young people on board, look at this fashion, and then we're like, bang, let's talk about gender norms. Let's talk about all these other underlying issues in a way that is easy to consume for the everyday person.
The literacy rate in Solomon Islands is quite low, so people are not able to understand if you put gender words in words that are too sophisticated for them to understand. So when you put it in acting, it simplifies all the stories that you want to tell. So people read, like they say, actions speak louder than words. So actions give the message to the audience or to the whole of the people in the country more than you putting up it in a paper, or because sometimes internet isn't available in some of the islands. So if we go out to the provinces and we perform, they get to see and know where to get justice just by seeing our performance.
In Pohnpei, in the North Pacific, domestic violence continues to be a major cause for concern.
Domestic violence was the most common violence we have at home. And for rape, it's also happens mostly at home by relatives. And with the findings that we had in 2014, a counseling center was created to assist the victims and also to help out on what to do regarding the relatives that caused the violence or the crimes.
When you put a gender topic into this scenario, you have stories that covers every oppression that women and young girls and children and people with disability faces every day. So Theatre for Development is a model that is based out of experience, and we complement that with facts and data that we get from our friends in Solomon Islands. So mainly the Ministry of Women, as well as other NGOs and INGOs that are working in this space, particularly their research and findings.
Bombay were successful because the domestic violence law was established in 2017, and the family protection law was also done in 2014. And in 2019, the age of consent and the disability act was also approved in Bombay in the same year. So Bombay State is well off than the rest of the other states in Micronesia.
Within this play, there are scripts or scenes which tell stories like Justice for Girls, which is, as you might have known, we have a case which involves a rape of a little girl who lost her life. So we had one scene that deals with the justice system within Solomon Islands. So it's kind of emotional, but it also tells the story of women who are not able to tell their stories or who had difficulty finding justice within their lives.
Men also have an important role to play, not only advocating and supporting women in gender-based violence, but as champions.
So this is why SISTA, in partnership with HCDI, organized an advocacy campaign entitled Chenis Emista Lohanbloyu, The Change is in Your Hands, that features male leaders talking about why Vanuatu men can and should do to stop the violence individually and collectively. It showcases 18 prominent male champions of change and highlights the role of men to prevent gender-based violence and to promote healthy and positive behavior in men.
The other thing as well about men, male champion, engaging men who do this work is that you really have to train them, and it's a really long-term thing. Change isn't easy. It's something it's very difficult, but it is possible, but you just have to have the right mechanisms in place. And part of those right mechanisms are making sure that the men who are doing this work, they align to the women's movement. They are learning from the women's movement and taking directions from the women's movement, because a lot of times men who start doing this work just start going off on a tangent, and then when that happens, sooner or later they'll make a mistake. And there's a wealth of evidence to show around how men who are identified as champions often do something that's contrary to gender, contrary to violence against women.
We understand and take serious preventative and reactive roles we play in addressing gender-based violence within the community. The key to achieving this is trust and collaboration. We're actively doing all we can in this message. It has been reiterated to all officers from the senior command to the very junior officer by the Commissioner of Police.
I know some police officers whose whole life is dedicated to supporting women who are victims of violence. When these women sadly pass away, no one says that they were a champion, or no one says that they're a woman of honor at their funeral. So, these are women who give their life to the work, yet we don't see them as champions or as people or women of honor. So just to be careful, just think we should, when doing this work, we really have to be careful how we are identifying men, because otherwise we just slip back into the patriarchy.
I believe that the youths are the most vulnerable people, and they could be the perpetrators, or they could be anyone that could commit any of these things. So I think working with them and trying to use whatever I do to had to reach out to these youths is that's my part as a male advocate.
Raising awareness within the private sector is also very crucial.
So just some of the things that the private sector can do is, and it's very similar to what already a lot of government work around gender equality, disability, and social inclusion is already doing, is that the private sector should be incorporating things around gender equality and social inclusion. And even though gender is both about men and women, it has to be quite specific that the focus should be on the advancement of women, advancement of females within the workplace, within the private sector.
The impact of COVID-19 is not gender blind. Therefore, the response to it should not be either. Not only during the pandemic, but in everyday development work, the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals to leave no one behind cannot be fulfilled without ending violence against women.
In committing to the realization of the 2013 Agenda for Sustainable Development, member states recognize that the dignity of individual is fundamental and that agenda's goal and targets should be met for all nations and people and all segments of the society. We all need to join hands during the 16-day activism against gender-based violence with the aim of creating awareness and act to end violence against women and girls in partnership with government, civil society, and citizens. We need to work together to protect women and girls against violence as a key principle in achieving Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. We need to make every woman count, and I wish to really sincerely thank you all for being with us here in this journey.